He woke up beside the widowed Apache woman, but the cowboy's mind was still on the night Wild West. Luke, a cowboy who had spent most of his life roaming the plains, rode slowly along a narrow trail, his horse's hooves kicking up soft clouds of dust. The air was cold, and the wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and distant pine. Luke was tired more than usual, for the past few days had been rough. He had narrowly escaped an ambush by a small band of outlaws who had tried to take his supplies and his horse. The memory of their faces, their shouts, and the sudden chaos haunted him even now. As he rode, he noticed a thin column of smoke curling upward from the distance. It was faint, almost like a dream against the horizon, but Luke's instincts told him it meant life. Out here in the Wild West, smoke meant someone had made a fire for warmth or cooking, and in this lonely desert that could mean danger or refuge. He guided his horse carefully, staying low in the saddle, eyes scanning for movement. The closer he came, the more he could see the signs of a small camp. There were footprints in the sand, scattered tools, and a few broken branches arranged as if someone had tried to build a shelter. It seemed simple, humble, but it had the signs of care. Luke dismounted quietly, patting his horse on the neck to calm it. He knew the land well enough to know that even a small camp could hide danger, but something about the way the fire flickered suggested someone was alone. Sitting by the fire was a woman. She looked to be in her early 30s, with sharp, striking features softened by a sadness that clung to her like a shadow. Her hair was dark and tied back in a simple braid, and her eyes, though alert, carried the weight of loss. Luke recognized the signs immediately. She was Apache, and from the quiet strength in her posture, he guessed she had been living here for some time. The loneliness of the plains had not broken her, it had only made her careful. For a moment, Luke considered turning back. Cowboys often avoided contact with strangers out here. Trust was rare, and danger came in many forms. But something in her presence, calm, measured, almost like she was reading the wind and the stars together, made him pause. Instead of leaving, he walked slowly toward the fire, keeping his hands visible, showing he meant no harm. The woman looked up as he approached. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and Luke raised his hands in greeting. "Evening," he said softly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Just a traveler passing through." The woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Evening," she replied in a measured voice. "You're far from the nearest town. What brings you here?" Luke shrugged. "Need water, need rest. This land, it's been long today." He paused, then added, "You live out here alone?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Not completely alone, but the man I lived with, he's gone. The raids, the fights. He didn't make it." Her voice was calm, but it carried a quiet sorrow that made Luke's chest tighten. He nodded slowly, understanding more than she probably realized. Loss was a companion in the life of a wanderer like him. Luke moved closer to the fire, but stayed at a respectful distance. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Words like these rarely mattered, but he felt he needed to say them. She nodded again. "It is what it is. You cannot change the past out here." She reached into a small bag and pulled out a few dried roots and nuts. "If you are hungry, you can share some. There is enough for both of us." Luke hesitated. Accepting food from a stranger in the Wild West could be risky, but he trusted her careful, steady gaze. He nodded and sat down across from her. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks into the dark night. As he ate, he thought about the events of the previous evening, the ambush, the sudden gunfire, the desperate ride to escape. His mind replayed the scene over and over, like a reel of a story he could not finish. Yet being here, in this quiet desert with someone who had endured her own tragedies, gave him a strange sense of relief. It was as if their shared solitude created a small island of calm in the chaos of the world. The woman, whose name he learned was Kaya, spoke softly as she tended the fire. She told him about the land, how to read the patterns of the wind, how to track animals, how to find water in places that looked dry. Luke listened closely, absorbing every word. Even after years as a cowboy, he knew there was always more to learn, and the wisdom of someone who had survived on her own in this harsh desert was invaluable. They spoke little of themselves at first, focusing on the practical matters of survival. But as the hours passed, the conversation slowly turned toward more personal stories. Luke spoke of the towns he had passed through, the friends he had lost, and the loneliness of the open plains. Kaya listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or sharing a quiet story of her own. She had lost her husband to a raid, but she had also learned to survive, to protect herself, and to endure. Night deepened. The fire dwindled to glowing embers, and the temperature dropped. Luke felt the chill creeping into his bones, and Kaya offered a blanket. He accepted, grateful, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to rest a little, though his mind still lingered on the ambush he had survived. They did not speak much after that. Words were unnecessary when the desert itself seemed to hold its breath around them. The silence was comfortable, filled with the occasional whisper of the wind and the crackle of the fire. Luke could feel Kaya's steady breathing beside him and realized that, despite the dangers and the uncertainty, he was not entirely alone. Somewhere deep in the desert, away from towns, lawmen, and the chaos of civilization, two lives had briefly intersected. One, a wandering cowboy with memories of danger and loss. The other, a widowed Apache woman who had learned to survive through strength, patience, and quiet courage. They were different in many ways, yet in that vast and empty night, they shared the same reality: the need for warmth, safety, and the hope that tomorrow would bring a little light to guide them. Luke lay back, staring at the stars, letting the fire's warmth seep into his body. For a moment, the ambush, the pain, the fear, all of it, felt distant. In its place was a quiet sense of connection, fragile but real, like a tiny spark in the darkness. And though he could not yet know what the coming days would bring, he understood one simple truth: survival was easier, and the long, lonely night less daunting, when shared with someone who understood the world in their own way. As the night wore on, Luke's thoughts gradually quieted. His body was exhausted, and his mind, though restless, found a small measure of peace. Kaya's presence was steady, grounding, and even though he had not planned to stay, he realized he was willing to see where this chance encounter might lead. Outside, the desert was still and silent, but around the small fire, two people were beginning a connection that would shape the days ahead. And in that silence, Luke finally allowed himself to rest, letting the memory of the night before fade just enough for him to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Morning arrived slowly over the desert, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange. The first rays of the sun touched the sand and rocks, making them glow like copper. Luke stirred awake, feeling the chill of the early morning air on his face. For a moment he was unsure where he was, until the memory of last night returned: the fire, the quiet, and the presence of Kaya beside him. He shifted slightly, careful not to disturb her, and watched as she moved quietly, tending to the dying embers of the fire. Kaya's movements were calm and precise. She gathered a few dry sticks, arranged them carefully, and coaxed the remaining coals into a small flame. Luke admired her skill. Living alone in the desert, she had learned to make the simplest tools and techniques last longer. There was a kind of beauty in her careful hands and steady gaze. Even though they had only just met, he sensed a deep strength in her, one that could endure hardships most people could not imagine. "You awake?" Kaya asked softly, glancing at him over her shoulder. Her voice was quiet, not demanding, just a gentle acknowledgement of his presence. Luke nodded. "Yeah, morning came sooner than I thought." He rubbed his eyes and then smiled faintly. "You're early," Kaya shrugged lightly. "You can't wait for trouble in this land. It finds you before you find it. Best to be ready." Her eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and observant. Luke knew she was right. Out here, the desert had its own rules, and anyone who underestimated it often paid the price. He stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from riding all night. "You've been living here long?" he asked, trying to make casual conversation. "Some years," she replied. Since the raids took him, I've been alone. I watch, I wait, I survive." "That is all?" Her tone was matter-of-fact, but there was an unmistakable sadness beneath it, a quiet longing for what was lost. Luke nodded, understanding more than she realized. He had spent most of his life on the move, but the loss he carried was different. Friends, towns, families he had known, gone. The frontier was cruel, and it did not forgive mistakes or mercy. Sharing this moment of quiet with Kaya, he felt the loneliness that he thought he had buried, rising again, though softened by her presence. "Coffee?" Kaya asked, motioning toward a small metal pot. Luke accepted, grateful for the warmth. The bitter drink and the heat from the cup seeped into his hands and helped him feel alive again. As they drank, they spoke of small things: the trail, the weather, the animals they had seen. But Luke noticed something deeper in their conversation. It was as if they were both testing the waters, gauging whether trust could exist between them in such an unpredictable world. Kaya shared tips about the land, showing him how to find fresh water even when it seemed the desert had none. She pointed out the tracks of rabbits and coyotes, explaining which ones might lead to food or danger. Luke listened carefully, impressed by her knowledge. Even after years of traveling the plains, he realized there were lessons he had yet to learn, and she was offering them freely. As they packed up the small camp, Luke noticed the way Kaya moved, efficient, confident, and careful. Every gesture told him she had lived a life full of hardships, but had never allowed herself to be broken. He began to see her not just as someone who had lost a husband, but as a person capable of immense resilience and courage. "Where are you headed?" Kaya asked as he adjusted the saddle on his horse. Luke hesitated. He was not sure. His journey had been aimless for weeks, following rumors of work or safety, but he did not want to admit that to her. "Just moving east," he said finally. "Looking for work or a place that feels settled." She gave a small nod, neither judgmental nor curious, just acknowledging his words. "The land will guide you," she said. "It always does if you pay attention." They began to walk together, Luke leading his horse while Kaya followed, carrying a small bundle of supplies. The desert stretched around them, endless and quiet, with only the soft wind and occasional bird call breaking the silence. Luke felt a strange sense of calm walking beside her. The presence of another human being, someone who had endured hardship and survived, made the loneliness of the open plains easier to bear. As the morning grew warmer, Luke's thoughts drifted back to the night before, the ambush he had barely survived. He remembered the sound of gunfire, the rush of adrenaline, and the desperate flight through the darkness. Kaya's calm demeanor, in contrast to his restless mind, made him realize how differently people could face danger. While he carried fear and memory of the past, she had accepted life's risks and learned to live within them. Kaya noticed his distant expression and asked softly, "You think too much about last night, don't you?" Luke shrugged. "Can't help it. Things like that, they stick with you." She nodded. "Better to learn from them than to let them control you. You survived." "That is enough for now." Her words were simple, but they carried wisdom that only someone who had faced loss could give. Luke felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Maybe he could let go of the fear for a little while and simply exist in the moment. They stopped near a small spring, a hidden oasis in the desert. Kaya knelt and dipped her hands into the cool water, drinking and then offering it to Luke. He knelt beside her, feeling the refreshment seep through his body. For the first time in days, he felt truly awake and present, not just a man haunted by the past. While they rested, they began to share stories, not about loss, but about life, about small joys and lessons learned. Kaya spoke of her husband, of the simple happiness they had known before tragedy struck. Luke spoke of friends and towns he had passed through, of the quiet moments he had found in the vast wilderness. They laughed occasionally, a soft, quiet sound that seemed almost foreign in the still desert, but it was healing. By midday, they had packed up again, moving toward higher ground where they could see the land around them. Luke noticed how Kaya's eyes scanned the horizon, alert for danger, and realized that her strength was not only in surviving, but in being constantly aware, prepared, and thoughtful. It reminded him of the importance of paying attention to every detail in the harsh life of the West. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became intense. Luke offered some of his water to Kaya, who refused politely at first, but eventually accepted. They shared the small rations of food they had, taking turns carrying supplies, and continued on through the desert. Luke could feel a bond forming between them, not romantic yet, but one built on respect, trust, and shared endurance. By late afternoon, they found a small, shaded canyon that offered relief from the scorching sun. They set up a temporary resting place, and Luke finally allowed himself to sit quietly, letting the events of the day sink in. He thought about the desert, about survival, about the quiet wisdom of Kaya, and about the fragile thread of trust that had begun to form between them. Kaya sat nearby, humming softly as she arranged stones to create a simple barrier against the wind. Luke watched her for a while, realizing that this brief partnership had given him something rare in his wandering life, a sense of stability, even if only for a day. For the first time in a long while, he felt the stirrings of hope that life could offer companionship and safety, even in a harsh and lonely land. As evening approached, the sun dipped low, and shadows stretched across the canyon floor. Luke built a small fire while Kaya gathered kindling nearby. They worked together in silence, comfortable with each other's presence. The desert around them was quiet, but inside the canyon, life felt warm, even safe, for the first time in many months. Luke sat by the fire, staring at the glowing embers. He thought of the night before, of the ambush, and of how easily life could be lost. But he also thought of the present, the companionship he had found with Kaya, the knowledge she had shared, and the quiet strength she carried. For the first time, he realized that survival was not only about avoiding danger, but also about forming connections that could help you endure the hardships of the world. As the stars appeared overhead, Luke and Kaya sat quietly by the fire, sharing warmth and understanding. Neither spoke much, but the silence was filled with unspoken respect and the comfort of knowing that, in a vast and often cruel world, they were not entirely alone. And in that moment, Luke felt something shift within him, a sense that tomorrow, whatever it might bring, could be faced together, or at least with the hope that the desert had allowed them to find a rare and fleeting connection. The sun climbed high over the desert, turning the sand a bright, almost blinding gold. Luke and Kaya had spent the morning walking along a narrow canyon path, their temporary campsite now far behind them. The land stretched endlessly on all sides, rolling hills and rocky outcrops giving the illusion of a vast, empty world. But the desert was never truly empty. Luke had learned that the hard way. Danger could appear suddenly, outlaws, wild animals, or even the harshness of nature itself. He kept his eyes sharp, scanning every shadow, every movement, as he guided his horse along the rocky trail. Kaya walked beside him, calm and steady, carrying a small bundle of supplies. Her eyes were constantly moving, reading the signs of the land as if it spoke to her directly. Luke admired her skill. She could tell, just from the tracks in the sand, where animals had passed and where danger might lie. He realized that he had much to learn from her, not just about survival, but about seeing the world with patience and attention. As they walked, Kaya spoke softly about the importance of staying alert. "The desert is beautiful," she said, "but it can change in an instant. You must know when to move, when to rest, and when to hide." Luke nodded. He had learned that lesson the hard way during the ambush, but hearing it from someone who had lived alone in this land made it feel more urgent and real. By midday, they had reached a small plateau that offered a wide view of the surrounding plains. From here, Luke could see the faint traces of trails winding through the desert, the distant outlines of mountains, and even the shimmer of a far-off stream. It was peaceful, almost deceptively so, but Luke knew better. Danger often came from where it was least expected. Kaya stopped and knelt, examining the sand closely. Luke approached and saw what she was looking at, fresh tracks not far from their path. They were the marks of horses moving in a hurried, uneven pattern. Luke's heart tightened. Outlaws. The same kind he had narrowly escaped a few nights ago. "They are close," Kaya said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "They passed here recently. We must be careful." Luke nodded, his mind sharpening instantly. His thoughts of the previous ambush came rushing back, along with the adrenaline he had thought he had left behind. This was real. The threat was here again. They moved slowly, keeping to the rocks and shadows, trying to stay out of sight. Kaya led Luke to a small, hidden hollow where they could observe without being seen. From this vantage point, they could see a group of men riding in the distance. Luke counted them carefully. 4, maybe 5, armed and alert. They were looking for travelers, for anyone weak or alone to rob or threaten. Luke felt a familiar tension coil in his chest. Kaya whispered, "We need a plan. We cannot fight them head-on, not like this, but we can use the land." "Watch, listen, and wait." Luke nodded, impressed by her strategic thinking. He had always relied on guns and speed, but Kaya was showing him another way: patience, observation, and using the environment to your advantage. They spent the afternoon preparing. Luke moved quietly, setting simple traps along the path he knew the outlaws might take, using stones and small branches to create obstacles. Kaya showed him how to read the wind, how to use natural cover, and how to predict where the outlaws would likely pass. Luke realized that he had underestimated the value of her knowledge. Her experience alone could save them both. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with deep reds and purples, Luke and Kaya crouched in the hollow, watching the outlaws approach. The group rode cautiously, scanning the landscape, unaware of the pair hidden in the shadows. Luke felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The danger was real, but so was the opportunity to protect themselves and prove their skill. Kaya touched his arm lightly. "Remember, stay calm, move only when needed. The land is our ally. Luke nodded, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. Her confidence was infectious, and he realized that he trusted her instincts completely. The outlaws continued past, missing the traps they had prepared but slowing slightly as they noticed the subtle disturbances in the sand. Luke held his breath, waiting for a signal from Kaya. She nodded subtly, and they moved carefully, repositioning to a more concealed spot along a narrow pass. The terrain here was perfect. The walls of rock created natural barriers, and the outlaws would have to pass through in a narrow line, giving Luke and Kaya an advantage if it came to confrontation. Hours passed. The sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Luke felt the tension building, knowing the outlaws would not simply ride past without noticing something. He glanced at Kaya, who remained calm, almost serene. She moved quietly, checking the position of rocks and sand, adjusting their hiding spot with precision. Luke realized that this was survival at its purest: skill, patience, and careful observation. Finally, the outlaws entered the narrow pass. Luke and Kaya watched in silence. The men were tense, scanning the cliffs, speaking in low, harsh tones. Luke felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment they had prepared for, though he hoped it would not come to violence. Kaya whispered instructions, guiding him on when to act and how to use the environment to their advantage. As the men passed, one of them stumbled slightly, triggering one of the simple obstacles Luke had set. A small rock tumbled down the slope, causing the group to pause. Kaya used the distraction, signaling Luke to stay low. They could see the surprise and confusion in the outlaws' faces. Luke felt a surge of satisfaction. Their preparation, their careful planning was working. The outlaws regrouped, trying to understand what had happened. Kaya and Luke remained hidden, silent as shadows. They watched as the men moved cautiously forward, unaware that they were being observed, outsmarted by two people who had learned to survive in the harshest of conditions. Luke felt a deep respect for Kaya. Her calmness, her intelligence, and her knowledge of the land had turned a dangerous situation into an opportunity to stay safe. By the time the outlaws rode out of sight, the tension began to ease. Luke exhaled slowly, realizing that they had avoided confrontation without bloodshed. Kaya smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting relief and quiet pride. Luke returned the smile, feeling a bond growing stronger between them. They had faced danger together, relied on each other, and survived. As the night approached, Luke and Kaya made camp near a small rock shelter. They built a fire, careful to keep it low and hidden. The desert night returned, full of stars and the quiet whispers of the wind. Luke reflected on the day, thinking about the skill, patience, and courage it had taken to navigate the threat. He realized that the frontier was not just about strength or quick shooting. It was about understanding the land, anticipating danger, and trusting those you survived alongside. Kaya spoke softly as they prepared their modest meal. "You are learning," she said. "The land teaches those who pay attention. Fear can help you survive, but knowledge keeps you alive." Luke nodded, grateful for her guidance and presence. He had always believed he could survive alone, but now he understood the value of partnership, even temporary, in a world where danger was constant. They ate quietly, watching the desert around them, alert for any signs of movement. Luke felt a growing sense of respect for Kaya, not just for her survival skills, but for the calm wisdom she carried. The day had tested them, but it had also taught them trust, strategy, and the importance of patience. As they lay down by the fire, Luke stared at the stars above, letting the quiet of the desert fill his mind. The events of the day, the threat they had faced, and the lessons they had learned settled into his thoughts. He realized that the frontier was unforgiving, but with skill, observation, and trust, it was possible to survive and even find moments of connection in an otherwise lonely world. Kaya's presence beside him, calm and steady, made the night feel less daunting. For the first time in a long while, Luke felt that the desert, with all its danger and beauty, could be a place of learning, respect, and even quiet companionship. And as the fire's warmth faded into embers, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, and that he and Kaya would face them together, ready, alert, and stronger for what they had learned today. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long, golden rays across the rugged terrain. Luke and Kaya had spent the night in a small rock shelter, resting their bodies and planning their next steps. The previous day had tested their patience, observation, and courage, but the threat of the outlaws had not vanished. Luke knew that sooner or later they would return, and this time they might not pass by quietly. Kaya stirred first, her movements as precise and calm as always. She checked their small fire, making sure it was extinguished, and gathered a few dry sticks for later. Luke watched her quietly, noting how every action was purposeful. Survival in the desert was more than endurance. It was attention to detail, and Kaya excelled at it. "They'll be back," Luke said softly, breaking the silence. "I can feel it. They won't let us go so easily." Kaya nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We cannot assume that. We must be ready for anything, and we must use the land to our advantage. Fear will not help us. Only preparation and attention will." Her voice was steady, filled with quiet authority. Luke felt reassured. He trusted her instincts completely. They moved through the canyon carefully, choosing a path that offered both cover and a view of the open plains below. Luke led his horse while Kaya carried a small bundle of supplies. The land was familiar to Kaya, and she pointed out small landmarks, hidden dips, and rocky outcrops that could be used for defense. Luke realized that in this harsh desert, knowledge was more valuable than any weapon. As they reached a narrow pass, Kaya stopped and crouched behind a large boulder. Luke followed. From this position, they could see a group of riders approaching in the distance, the outlaws. There were 5 of them, armed and moving cautiously, clearly aware that the land could hold surprises. Luke felt a familiar tension in his chest, but Kaya's calm presence helped steady him. "We must act carefully," Kaya whispered. "The pass is narrow. If they come through here, we can control their movement, but we must wait for the right moment." Luke nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. He had faced danger before, but never with this level of preparation and strategy. Kaya's guidance made him feel both confident and cautious. They were a team now, relying on each other's strengths. The outlaws entered the pass, their horses moving slowly and unevenly over the rocky ground. Luke and Kaya watched in silence, every sense alert. One of the men dismounted, stepping carefully as he examined the terrain. The others remained on horseback, scanning the area. Luke's pulse quickened. This was the moment that could decide their fate. Kaya signaled subtly, pointing to a narrow ledge above the pass. "We can use this," she whispered. "From there, we have the advantage. They cannot reach us easily, and we can move quickly if needed." Luke followed her lead, climbing carefully to the ledge. The view from above was perfect. They could see the outlaws below, unaware of the position they had just given up. Kaya crouched beside him, her eyes sharp and calculating. Luke realized that this was more than survival. It was strategy, skill, and trust combined. The outlaws began to move forward again, and one of them tripped over a loose rock, drawing the attention of the others. Kaya whispered instructions, guiding Luke on when to act and how to position himself. Luke followed her advice without hesitation, trusting her instincts completely. For the next hour, they observed and adjusted. The outlaws moved cautiously, unsure of what lay ahead. Luke and Kaya stayed hidden, using the terrain to their advantage. Every small action, every careful step, brought them closer to control of the situation. Luke felt a sense of respect and admiration for Kaya's intelligence and courage. She was not just surviving, she was mastering the land and the moment. Finally, the outlaws reached a point where the ledge they had chosen allowed them to act decisively. Luke and Kaya moved swiftly, using the cover of rocks to remain unseen while setting small, strategic obstacles. One of the outlaws' horses stumbled, causing confusion in the group. Kaya nodded to Luke, signaling that it was time to act. They moved carefully, using the natural barriers of the pass to control the outlaws' movement. Luke realized that this was not just about survival, it was about skill, strategy, and timing. Every decision mattered, and Kaya's calm guidance made all the difference. The outlaws were forced to slow their progress, their attention divided between the obstacles and the unknown presence of Luke and Kaya. Luke felt a surge of satisfaction. Their preparation, patience, and observation had given them the upper hand. They were not just defending themselves, they were outsmarting the threat. One of the outlaws dismounted to investigate a suspicious sound, and Luke saw an opportunity. He moved slightly, signaling Kaya. They stayed hidden but positioned themselves to respond if necessary. Kaya's eyes were sharp, her mind focused on every detail. Luke realized that this partnership, though brief, had changed the way he approached danger. He was no longer just reacting. He was thinking, planning, and trusting someone else to guide him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the pass, the outlaws finally decided to retreat. They had not found Luke and Kaya, and the obstacles had made them cautious enough to abandon the area. Luke exhaled slowly, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. Kaya smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting pride and quiet satisfaction. "You did well," she said softly. "Patience and preparation are more powerful than haste and force." Luke nodded, feeling a deep respect for her wisdom. "I never realized how much could be gained by watching, waiting, and thinking ahead. You've taught me more than I expected." They made their way back to a safer location, setting up a small camp for the night. Luke built a fire while Kaya arranged their supplies, both of them alert but no longer tense. The danger had passed for now, and they could finally rest. As they sat by the fire, Luke reflected on the day's events. The outlaws had been a real threat, but together they had faced it with skill and intelligence. He realized that survival in the desert was not just about strength or weapons. It was about strategy, patience, and trust. And in Kaya, he had found someone who embodied all of these qualities. Kaya spoke quietly as they prepared their simple meal. "The land teaches those who pay attention. Fear can help you survive, but knowledge keeps you alive." Luke nodded, grateful for her guidance and presence. He had always believed he could survive alone, but now he understood the value of partnership, even temporary, in a world where danger was constant. As night fell, the stars appeared above them, and the desert returned to its quiet, endless expanse. Luke felt a growing sense of respect for Kaya, not just for her survival skills, but for the calm wisdom she carried. The day had tested them, but it had also taught them trust, strategy, and the importance of patience. They lay down near the fire, exhausted but safe. Luke stared at the sky, thinking about the outlaws, the desert, and the lessons of the day. For the first time in a long while, he felt that the frontier, with all its danger and uncertainty, could be navigated successfully with careful planning, attention, and trust in another person. Kaya's presence beside him made the night feel less daunting. For the first time, Luke felt that he was not entirely alone. The desert was still vast and wild, but together they had faced danger and survived. And as the fire's warmth faded into embers, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, and that he and Kaya would face them with strength, skill, and mutual respect. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, soft and warm, casting a golden glow over the rocky landscape. Luke and Kaya had spent the night in the safety of their hidden canyon camp, resting and reflecting on the events of the previous day. The confrontation with the outlaws had left them both exhausted, but it had also strengthened their trust in each other. For the first time in a long while, Luke felt a sense of calm that he had not known for years on the open plains. Kaya stirred first, as usual, checking their supplies and making sure everything was in order. Luke watched her quietly, admiring her careful movements and the calm confidence that radiated from her. She had survived so much, endured the harshest conditions, and yet she remained strong, focused, and unbroken. Luke felt a deep respect for her, not just for her survival skills, but for the wisdom and patience she carried with her every day. "You rested well?" Kaya asked softly, glancing at him. Luke nodded. "Better than I have in a long time." "I feel lighter somehow." He paused, looking out at the endless desert stretching before them. "The land doesn't seem so lonely when someone else shares it with you, even for a short time." Kaya gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Companionship is rare out here, but it can give strength even when danger surrounds us." Her words carried a quiet truth. Luke realized that their partnership had been more than survival. It had been a connection that reminded him of what it meant to trust, to rely on another, and to care for someone besides himself. They packed up their camp carefully, leaving no trace behind, as the desert demanded respect and caution. Luke adjusted the saddle on his horse while Kaya organized their remaining supplies. They moved together through the rocky terrain, alert but calm, each step taken with purpose. The previous day's confrontation had taught them both the value of patience, observation, and cooperation, and they carried those lessons forward as they traveled. As they walked, Luke thought about the outlaws, about the danger they had faced, and about the lessons he had learned. The Wild West was unforgiving, full of harsh landscapes, unpredictable weather, and people who often acted without mercy. But he had discovered something equally powerful. That survival was not just about strength or skill, but about intelligence, planning, and the courage to trust another person. Kaya noticed his thoughtful expression and asked, "You are thinking about what happened yesterday, aren't you?" Luke nodded slowly. I keep thinking about how close it came to being worse and how much difference preparation and trust made. I've always relied on myself, but I see now that working together changes everything. She smiled gently. The land teaches us many lessons. Some are harsh, some are kind. Those who learn from them survive. Those who ignore them do not. Her tone was calm but filled with authority, and Luke could not help but feel that her words were meant as much for him as for herself. By midday, they reached a small ridge overlooking a wide valley. The view was breathtaking: rolling hills, patches of green where water had collected, and a meandering stream that glimmered in the sunlight. It was a rare sight in the desert, a reminder that beauty and danger often existed side by side. Luke felt a sense of peace wash over him, knowing that they had reached this point safely together. Kaya stopped and knelt by the stream, cupping her hands to drink the clear water. Luke followed her example, feeling the cool liquid refresh his body and mind. For a moment they sat in silence, letting the sounds of the flowing water and the gentle rustling of the wind fill the air. The tension of the past days seemed to fade slightly, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment and connection. "You've taught me a lot," Luke said finally, breaking the silence. "Not just about the land, but about patience, observation, and thinking ahead. I never realized how much could be gained by slowing down and trusting someone else." Kaya looked at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "And you've taught me that sometimes strength is more than endurance. It is courage, intelligence, and willingness to act when needed. We have both learned and we have survived." The conversation was simple, but it carried a depth that words alone could not capture. Luke realized that this journey had changed him. He had come into the desert thinking only of survival and escaping danger, but he was leaving with something far more valuable: understanding, respect, and the beginning of a bond that neither of them had expected. As afternoon turned to evening, they set up a small camp near the stream. Luke built a fire while Kaya prepared a simple meal from the supplies they carried. The desert air cooled rapidly, and the warmth of the fire was comforting. They ate quietly, sharing the food and reflecting on the past days. Every small action, every careful step, every lesson learned had brought them closer together, and both recognized the importance of this trust and cooperation. Luke gazed at Kaya, thinking about how much she had endured and how she had faced danger with calmness and intelligence. He felt a deep admiration for her, realizing that strength could take many forms. Survival was not just about guns and speed. It was about patience, wisdom, and courage in the face of uncertainty. After their meal, they sat by the fire in companionable silence. Luke could see the stars appearing above them, twinkling in the clear desert sky. The vastness of the land reminded him of how small individual struggles could seem, and yet how significant every choice and every act of courage was. Kaya's presence beside him made the night feel less lonely, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. "You'll continue your journey soon, won't you?" Kaya asked softly, reading the thoughts in his eyes. Luke nodded, a small smile on his face. "I will. The plains are wide and I have places to go, but I won't forget this. Not you, not the lessons, not this time." Kaya's expression was calm, but Luke could see the acknowledgement in her eyes. "And I will not forget you. You have reminded me that even in the harshest times, companionship and trust are possible. You are welcome here any time the desert allows." They spent the night by the stream, the fire casting flickering shadows on the rocks. The desert was quiet, save for the whisper of the wind and the gentle flow of water. Luke reflected on the past days, the danger, the lessons, the moments of trust and cooperation. He realized that the desert, though unforgiving, had given him something rare, a connection that went beyond survival. Morning came again, and Luke knew it was time to continue his journey. He saddled his horse carefully, checking supplies and turning to Kaya. "I will ride ahead," he said, "but I will return if the land allows it. You have given me more than I expected, and I cannot forget that." Kaya nodded, her eyes steady and calm. "Safe travels, Luke. The desert watches over those who respect it. May your path be clear, and may your mind stay sharp." With a final nod, Luke mounted his horse and turned toward the open plains. Kaya watched silently, her figure standing strong and composed by the stream. They had faced danger together, survived the challenges of the desert, and formed a bond that would endure even when distance separated them. Luke felt a sense of gratitude, hope, and quiet determination. As he rode away, the wind in his face and the endless landscape stretching before him, Luke thought of Kaya, of the lessons she had taught him, and of the trust they had built. The Wild West was still vast, wild, and unpredictable, but he now carried with him something more powerful than skill or survival instinct. The knowledge that connection, respect, and shared courage could make even the harshest journey meaningful. He rode into the horizon, the sun climbing higher, casting long shadows across the plains. Behind him, Kaya stood quietly by the stream, watching him go. The desert remained as wild and unforgiving as ever. But in that moment, it also held the memory of trust, courage, and a bond that neither would forget. And though Luke's journey would continue, he knew that the lessons, the friendship, and the quiet strength of this desert encounter would remain with him forever.